Gary from Cubase Academy with another in the HALion5 series. Today we're going to talk about the FlexPhraser and what it can be used for in your patches. Very powerful. We're going to start by breaking down an existing FlexPhraser set that is within the HALion City patch. And that's the default patch that loads when I load HALion5. Probably the same applies to you when you load it. That's the patch that comes up. So this is what it sounds like. I'm just going to use the trigger pads down here. A lot of movement in that patch. It's got a bass line that moves, a couple of different chord patterns that move. Let's take a look at how that works. I have the patch loaded, and you can see right off the bat that it has 3 layers. Well, it has 4 layers, but this one's empty. I've noticed that sometimes, depending on how you load it, it may have an extra empty layer or it may not. But it consists of the Auron, the Triumph, and the Voltage, which are 3 synths included with HALion5. And they can be used standalone or they can be used in a HALion5 patch this way. So we'll start with the Auron, and I'm just going to solo it. And when we play the sound, you'll hear kind of a stringy type patch with a lot of movement. And it has a FlexPhraser. Let's first of all start by editing our sound. And notice if I go to the macro page, it does have a screen for editing the sound, and we're using FX Female Voice 3 as a origination of the patch sound, and you can see it's actually listed here too. If I go to the FlexPhraser, and then I'll need to make sure I'm in the sound, edit sound, then we can see that we have FlexPhraser, and if I turn it off by switching off this active, then we just have the sound without the FlexPhraser. On, off. Okay, so you can see how that's modifying this sound. Let's go down and look at the Triumph and see how that's being modified. Again, it has a FlexPhraser. Here's with it on. And with it off. So it's modulating that sound. There are some other things modulating that sound too. If we look at the bus for the Triumph, we can see that there's a step flanger and a multi-delay. Same is true for the Auron. If I look at the bus, you can see there's a multi-delay and a vintage ensemble effect. So it's not just the FlexPhraser that's making the difference. Finally, the voltage. If we expand it out here and look at the FlexPhraser, it's on. And if I play just this sound, and you'll notice if I play a chord, or even from the trigger pad, it's only playing the root note, the bass note. If I turn off FlexPhraser, it'll play the whole chord. So it's a FlexPhraser that's limiting it to one note. Okay, so put that all together, and you have this patch called HALion City. Unless I haven't turned them back on again. Let's see, FlexPhraser, I didn't, did I? On. FlexPhraser on, and FlexPhraser on. And now we should have the original patch back. Okay, so that's one example of how to use it. I have another example here. This is using guitar samples. This patch is huge. It's a great patch. It contains over 1,500 Martin guitar samples, and it allows you to do some very powerful things. Even without the FlexPhraser, It has a bunch of key switches that allow you to play the guitar in open position 1 or 2 or dead position 1 or 2. And the FlexPhraser is just going to add to that by giving you some fingering patterns. And so I'm just going to play this sound. I'm going to play an E in the second octave. Now I'm not switching the notes. The FlexPhraser is going through this pattern by itself. I'm going to slow it down a little bit. Of course, I can switch keys. Pattern remains the same, relative. But the one thing that we can do is we can override that. If I just play a chord, I'm going to play a C chord. Too low. Notice when I play a chord, it's overriding that walkthrough, which allows me to do my own. So it's pretty nice. I can use one finger triggering, which allows the FlexPhraser to walk through its entire piece, or I can override it by playing chords. And then this patch is especially nice because I have all these key switches that allow me to play in open position or mute. Or dead. So some pretty nice things you can do with the FlexPhraser and then the key switches. Maybe I'll do a video just on key switches in the future. And finally, the sequence bass again. It's a similar thing, right? It's a sequence bass and it has a FlexPhraser. I'm going to go into more detail about how these FlexPhrasers are working. And I must have left it in the off position, so we'll turn it on. Oh, this one maybe wasn't on at all. But so this one has just a standard arpeggiator here. And there's actually not one here either, so they're both going to use a standard arpeggiator. Turn it on, it's going to use alternate 1. We'll talk about that. I'm going to come back to that. So if we go back to our guitar sample, our guitar patch, and I think I already talked about overriding. If we go into what it's actually using, and I will note one more thing. There might be a FlexPhraser at every single layer. Chances are they're not turned on at these individual layers. It doesn't make sense. The FlexPhraser is at the top, and therefore it affects everything below it. You can see that it's using a Company 1 or a Comp 1 by default, and that is this walking pattern that we heard before. Now, what if I want to add some variation there? I have plenty of options. First of all, note there are 8 variations that I can, and only one is on or active right now. Let me activate 2, and by default it's that alternate 1, which is not very useful for guitar. If we look at our options down here, we can go to the construction sets, look at guitar. I happen to know that it's in the steel category, and there is a Comp 1. Let's put a Comp 2 in here and give it a listen. and that's one finger. And of course the same thing applies before. If I play a chord, it'll override. Okay. And I can copy and paste by right-clicking and choosing Copy FlexPhraser Variation. Go to 3, and I'm going to paste it. So 2 and 3 are identical right now. But I can modify 3 by changing the gate scale, which shortens the notes as they're played. And you can lengthen them too. So I've got 2 is longer, 3 is very short. I can even do that on this original one. Lengthen it a little bit. There we go. So if I didn't want to necessarily click these little buttons here, they may not always be available. I may be in a different screen. I can right click and assign the variation to trigger pad 1. So now trigger pad 1 is assigned to variation 1, and when a trigger pad has a variation assigned, it gets a little amber light above it. When it has a blue outline, that means it has a notes or a chord assigned to it. When it has an amber light, it means it has a variation assigned to it, and of course it can have both. So a key change can also come with a variation change. I'm going to go ahead and add variation 2 to trigger pad 2, and then trigger pad 3 I'm going to do the long way. I'm going to select variation 3, and then on the trigger pad I'm going to right click and choose snapshot variation, which just grabs the active variation onto the pad. So now you can hear if I play a chord, a note, 3 is active. Okay, I'm going to hit trigger pad 1. I'm going to change the trigger mode to next beat so it doesn't cut so unnaturally. Of course, you could also choose next measure if you wanted to wait for a measure break before you change your variation. If I put hold on, then I don't have to, as soon as I press that note, it'll trigger that. As soon as I press E, it's going to keep playing it. And it'll keep it until I either turn hold off or I change the key. Alright, so a lot of fun we can have with this, right? You get to see some of the power here. And all we did was assign 2 patterns. There are a lot of patterns we could be working with. And then, of course, we have user patterns. So let's take a look at user patterns. How do you create your own patterns? I'm going to use the 80s sequence bass for this example. And as you heard before, it just doesn't have anything assigned to it. Now, while I turned on this, I turned them on in 2 places, which I shouldn't have done. There we go. It's just a standard sequenced bass sound. So I'm going to go to the top level FlexPhraser so it affects everything underneath it. So if I added more layers, they would also be affected. I'm going to turn it on and then click user. Notice how the interface changes. I now have a save, a delete, and a show editor page button, which I didn't have before. There it's gone. Now it's back. This KS off, by the way, is key switch off. If your key switches, you can filter out the key switches so they don't interfere with your sequence. So anything that's assigned to a key switch is ignored. Let's go back into user here. And under user, I can have a lot of starting points. This is a different list than the other list. This has bass chord, contemporary ARP, control, dance, and step sequence. Again, if I turn this off and then drop this list down, the list it's very different. Okay. So I'll go back to user, and I'm going to start with just a contemporary ARP Number 1, very basic. I'm going to play a note. You can see it's doing an octave and very evenly measured 16ths. By the way, you change the tempo scale here. That's tempo scale relative to the track tempo. I'm going back to 16ths. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit that by going into the Show Editor Page option. Now we get to see our step sequencer. If you've used step sequencers before, this will be very obvious to you. These are velocities, these bars. These are pitches down here. So we can see 0 is the root note you're playing, 12 is the transpose, so an octave, and then same thing, 0, 12, 0, 0, 0. So these are durations and velocities. And this is the whether they're on or off. I can just click these and then and you can see I can change velocity. I can add in let's see where we want that, maybe here. I'll bring it up here. I can also grab the edge of this note and drag it over, and now it's going to be a little longer. And if I want that to go all the way up, I can just say fill gap, and now do the same thing here. Grabbed it in the wrong place there. Fill gap. No, I didn't like that, so I'm going to just reduce it again. And I have the ability to make it very short note. Okay. Now, so I'm going to duplicate this. And now I have twice as, I have the same pattern repeating twice, and I can make edits here if I want. I could maybe make this 2 again. I'll just turn that back on and it split the note, and I could make this one longer instead. Whoops. I'll just turn that note off and drag this over. I will. There you go. And fill gap just to make sure it's there. I could say fill all gaps, you see that, if I didn't want these notes to be truncated anymore. There. So. Okay. I'm going to leave that as is. Now, we can add a control channel. There's nothing here. I'm going to just add some descending. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll do them here. 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll just leave those as is. Now, it's not going to do anything here, and the MIDI controller isn't assigned to anything. So we could assign it to something that we already know here. We've got plenty of options, right? I'm going to assign it to 20, control 20. It's not going to do anything. Because control 20 isn't assigned to anything. So now, to make this affect the sound, we have to go in and edit the sound itself. So what we'll do is we will click on the sound down here in the layer. And in the edit screen, again, we're edit sound. If we scroll to the bottom, we have what's called the Modulation Matrix. And I've talked about this in previous videos. Insanely powerful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to 4 here, which is empty. And I'm going to choose MIDI controller 20. Now, that is what we assigned in the FlexPhraser. And I'm going to now say, what does that do? What's the destination of that effect? And in this case, I'm going to put it on the resonance. Okay, and by how much? 100%. So now let's see what it sounds like. I didn't have enough. See, down here it's too low. In fact, let me put it on the cutoff first. We'll go like this. We can change the curves and do all kinds of things. And if you remember what it sounded like before, if we put this back, we just mute it. We can also affect it in a negative way. So obviously lots of things we can do. I'm going to go ahead and bring that back to 100. We'll affect it this way. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the FlexPhraser and that's interesting. What happened to my did I reset it? I didn't mean to. If I did, it doesn't make any sense. Okay, I'm going to put him back in. Not sure what happened, but so again, it's set to 20 here, and I'm going to go back to my sound, and it's set to 20 here. MIDI controller, 20, cutoff. There you go. Now then, the high notes are really making the difference here. Okay, and we'll do one more. Let's go ahead and set 20. We'll just do a sweep all the way down. We'll set this to MIDI controller 21. And we'll go back to our synth zone. And down here we'll say number 5, MIDI controller 21 is going to control, say, the resonance. Okay, so we've basically taken the FlexPhraser and we've created a pattern here, and we've created a couple of different controller channels that we've assigned to MIDI controllers, and then in the Modulation Matrix we've assigned those to an output to give us the end result, the sound that we want. And that was just one. So again, if this is an up, so maybe it should be up down. Random. You get the idea. And that's how you add custom FlexPhrasers to your sound. So this is just an overview. Obviously, you can imagine the amount of options you have available to you. It's very powerful. and it's just fun to play around with, and it's gives you inspiration and ideas. You can of course copy these patterns right into your Cubase or whatever you happen to be using as a DAW. And you can also drop MIDI files onto this box here, and it'll be used to set the groove for this, and you can set your groove strength right here. Anyway, fun with the FlexPhraser. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you liked the video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe for more videos, and as always, thank you very much for watching, and talk to you next time.